Voyage to go, history. Life is a journey, being part of it is everything. Hello, my name is Jessica. Welcome to episode 11 of my historical travel podcast, Voyage to go, history, where I take you on the most adventurous journeys from the past that continue to shape our view of the world today. In this true story, 17-year-old German Georg Forster travels around the world with his father, a naturalist in the 18th century, aboard a sailing ship under the command of James Cook. Georg's travel narrative is written in the language of the 18th century. To make it more understandable, I have largely translated it into modern language. His knowledge is that of the late 18th century, so I will place some of his statements in context and provide additional information. What happened in the last episode?
In the last episode, the crew of the HMS Resolution faced the brutal reality of the Southern Ocean. After weeks of battling relentless storms, towering icebergs, and the creeping threat of scurvy, they finally turned north. The harsh Antarctic climate had tested their endurance, with freezing winds and endless fog making every moment a struggle. Even the animals they had brought from the Cape of Good Hope suffered under these extreme conditions. As they sailed toward New Zealand, the sight of seabirds and floating seaweed lifted their spirits. Finally, after 122 days at sea and over 6,480 kilometers traveled, they reached Dusky Bay. Here they found shelter, abundant fish, and dense forests teeming with life. The contrast to their Antarctic ordeal was overwhelming. After months of hardship, this rugged but welcoming land seemed like paradise. Everywhere they went, they encountered so many fish and water birds that they had no reason to fear a shortage of food, no matter how long they stayed.
Friday, March 26, 1773, Dusky Bay, New Zealand.
Such promising conditions convinced Captain Cook to remain there for a while, especially since he had only briefly examined the southern end of New Zealand on his first voyage. Meanwhile, both in the animal and plant kingdoms, they discovered new riches. Hardly a single species fully matched those already known, and many could not even be classified within existing genera. This, they believed, would provide them with ample occupation during their stay, despite the autumn season already signaling the decline of plant life. Early in the morning, a small boat was sent to the shore. After 3 hours, it returned with enough fish, caught only with fishing lines, to provide a meal for the entire crew. The best and most flavorful among them was a type of cod, which the sailors, due to its color, called coalfish. Additionally, they caught various species of excellent slender sea bass, scorpionfish, mullets, jack mackerels, and other delicious fish unknown in Europe. At 9 o'clock, they set sail from their previous, inadequate anchorage and entered the harbor they had discovered the day before, which they named Pickersgill Harbor. Here they lay in a small cove, so close to the shore that they could reach it with just a simple wooden gangway. Nature provided further assistance with a large tree that had grown from the land in a slanted horizontal direction over the water. They secured its outer end to the ship and laid planks along its length, forming a walkway. The shore itself offered just as many conveniences for their needs. The trees stood so close to the ship that their branches reached the masts, and a stream of fresh water flowed just a pistol shot behind the vessel. Since wood and water were the main supplies they needed from the land, their close proximity made their work much easier. Their first task was to clear a nearby hill of trees to set up an observatory and a forge, as their ironwork was in urgent need of repair. At the same time, tents were set up near the shore for the sailmakers, coopers, water carriers, and woodcutters. During these activities, their initial high opinion of the land quickly diminished. The vast amount of vines, thorns, underbrush, and ferns that covered the forests made clearing even a small area extremely difficult. They quickly realized that penetrating deep into the interior would be nearly impossible. Indeed, it was historically plausible that this southern part of New Zealand had remained untouched, preserving its forests in their wild, natural state. The evidence was almost undeniable. Not only did the overwhelming vegetation make progress nearly impossible, but countless fallen trees blocked their path. These had either been toppled by the wind or had simply collapsed from age, turning over time into rich, decayed wood that had already given rise to new generations of young trees, parasitic plants, ferns, and mosses. Often, a deceptive bark covered the rotting interior of such a fallen trunk, and anyone who dared step on it would usually sink in up to the waist. The animal kingdom provided further evidence that this part of the land had likely never been disturbed by humans. At first glance, Dusky Bay seemed completely uninhabited. The many small birds appeared to have never seen a human form before. They remained unbothered on the nearest branches, or even hopped onto the very barrels of their muskets, observing them with curiosity equal to their own. At first, this innocent boldness protected them. Who could be heartless enough to shoot such fearless creatures at such close range? But within a few days, their trust proved fatal. A cat from the ship soon discovered the abundance of easy prey. Every morning it ventured into the woods, causing a terrible slaughter among the small birds, who did not guard themselves against this treacherous enemy, suspecting no harm from it.
New Zealand's birds evolved without land predators, making them remarkably fearless. Before humans arrived, the only mammals were bats, so many species became flightless or lost their instinct to flee. When the HMS Resolution reached New Zealand, Cook's crew was stunned how easily they could approach and catch birds. With no experience on ground-based threats, the native wildlife didn't recognize humans as predators. This changed with the introduction of rats, cats, and stoats, which decimated bird populations. Today, conservation efforts work to protect what remains of New Zealand's unique and once fearless bird life.
With the abundance of fish and the large number of waterfowl that promised various types of meat dishes, the only thing still missing from their table was fresh vegetables. To remedy this, they searched for suitable plants on their first botanical excursions. On the day after their arrival, they discovered a beautiful tree belonging to the myrtle family, which was in full bloom. During Captain Cook's first voyage, an infusion made from this tree had been used as a substitute for tea. Though it did not provide a full meal, it was still a welcome addition as a fresh herb and was immediately tested. The leaves had a pleasant, aromatic taste, slightly astringent, and gave the water a uniquely delightful flavor on the first infusion. However, when boiling water was poured over them a second time, the pleasant taste disappeared, replaced by extreme bitterness. They quickly learned not to steep it twice. The crew soon adopted this plant widely, and it seemed to help purify the blood and alleviate all symptoms of scurvy. Since this plant could be highly beneficial to future seafarers, it deserved to be better known and illustrated. They gladly allowed Captain Cook to use their drawings, and the Admiralty had them engraved and included in his voyage report. The same illustration was also added to the German edition of their travel account for naturalists to study with interest.
Captain Cook brewed New Zealand's first beer in 1773 during his second voyage, not for pleasure, but as a remedy against scurvy. Fresh provisions were scarce at sea, so Cook sought alternatives to citrus. In Dusky Sound, he used local rimu and manuka leaves, both rich in vitamin C, to make a spruce-style beer. The brew was meant to boost the crew's health, though its effectiveness against scurvy was questionable. Nonetheless, the sailors welcomed it as a refreshing change from their usual diet of salted meat and ship's biscuit. This historic batch marked the beginning of brewing in New Zealand, long before the arrival of European settlers. Today, craft brewers occasionally recreate Cook's recipe, linking modern beer culture to this first, unlikely experiment.
In rich soil and dense forests, the plant grew into a sizable tree, often reaching 9 to 12 meters, 30 to 40 feet in height, and about 30 centimeters, 1 foot in diameter. However, in mountainous dry terrain, they found it as a small shrub, barely 15 centimeters, 6 inches tall, though fully developed and bearing fruit and flowers. Typically, it grew to about 2.5 to 3 meters, 8 to 10 feet, with a trunk roughly 7.5 centimeters, 3 inches, in diameter. In this form, the trunk was irregular and uneven, sprouting branches just above the ground, which formed sharp angles and carried leaves and blossoms only at the outermost tips. The white flowers added great beauty to the plant. They also experimented with the leaves of another tree that was common in the area, attempting to make an infusion. However, due to its resemblance to coniferous trees and a distinctly resinous taste, they quickly realized that it was unsuitable for tea. Instead, they found it even better than the American spruce tree for brewing spruce beer, a well-known and healthy beverage in the West Indies. They successfully brewed a very good beer using it, with the addition of some beer wort essence and syrup. Later, they refined the taste by blending it with the leaves and flowers of the new tea tree, making it even more enjoyable. The flavor was pleasant, but slightly bitter. The only drawback was that drinking it early in the morning on an empty stomach sometimes caused nausea. In all other respects, however, it was an excellent and healthful drink. The New Zealand spruce tree was a magnificent sight. It sometimes grew as tall as 30 meters, 100 feet, with a trunk circumference of about 3 meters, 10 feet. Its drooping branches made it especially noticeable, and its foliage consisted of numerous long, light green, needle-like leaves that hung from the branches like threads, as shown in the accompanying illustration. Although only the spruce and tea trees provided something edible, the region's many other tree species were valuable for shipbuilding, carpentry, and other woodwork. Captain Cook admitted that, apart from the forests along the banks of the Thames River on the North Island, which he had explored during his previous voyage, he had not found better timber anywhere in New Zealand than in Dusky Bay. They had been in the bay for no more than 2 days when they were convinced that it could not be uninhabited.
Saturday, March 28, 1773, Dusky Bay, New Zealand.
On the morning of the 28th, some of the officers went hunting in a small boat and rowed into a bay about 2 or 3 English miles from the ship. On shore, they spotted some inhabitants attempting to launch a canoe into the water. As they approached, the New Zealanders began shouting loudly. Since the shouting made them seem more numerous than they actually were, the officers decided to return and inform the captain of their discovery. This precaution seemed especially necessary due to the heavy rain, which could have prevented their firearms from firing properly. Shortly after their return to the ship, a canoe appeared near a prominent headland, about a mile from them. It was occupied by 7 or 8 people who observed them for some time but could not be persuaded to come closer despite their friendly signals, such as shouting, waving white cloths, and displaying glass beads. After a while, they turned back and paddled away. As far as they could tell from a distance, the New Zealanders were dressed in mats and used broad paddles, propelling their canoe in the same manner as the inhabitants of the northern parts of New Zealand. Captain Cook decided to visit them that afternoon to reassure them and ease their fears. He had 2 boats launched, and some of the officers accompanied him along with others to the bay where the natives had first been seen. There, they found a double canoe pulled ashore near several low old huts. Nearby, there were remains of fires, along with fish nets and fish scattered around. The canoe was old and in poor condition. It consisted of 2 hollowed-out boats connected in the middle by crossbeams and tied together with ropes made from New Zealand flax. Each of these 2 boats was built from planks sewn together with cords and featured a roughly carved human face at the bow. The eyes were inlaid with small pieces of iridescent shell from the sea ear.
Sea ear is an Old English term for abalone, a type of marine mollusk with a distinctive ear-shaped shell. These shellfish are found in coastal waters around the world, including New Zealand, where they are known as pāua in Māori. Abalone attach themselves to rocks and feed on algae using a muscular foot to cling tightly to surfaces. Their shells are highly prized for their iridescent inner layer, which is often used for jewelry and decorative inlays. For sailors, like those of the HMS Resolution, abalone was a valuable food source when fresh supplies were scarce. Indigenous peoples, including the Māori, have harvested them for centuries, not only as food but also for their beautiful shells, which hold cultural and artistic significance.
Inside the canoe, they found 2 paddles, a basket full of berries from the Coriaria ruscifolia plant, and some fish. However, they neither saw nor heard any of the people, as they had apparently fled into the forest. To gain their trust and goodwill, they left some trinkets, including medallions, mirrors, glass beads, and other small gifts in the canoe, before returning to their boats to explore the bay further and map its layout. During this excursion, they discovered a beautiful stream flowing across the flat shore into the sea. The water here was so shallow over a long stretch that their boats occasionally touched the bottom. They encountered many birds, including ducks, cormorants, black oyster catchers, and various species of plovers. On their way back, they could not resist checking on the canoe once more, but found everything as they had left it. To increase the value of their previous gifts, they now added an axe. To demonstrate its use, they chopped off some wood chips from a tree and left the axe embedded in the trunk. However, their main goal remained unfulfilled. For the second time, they saw no sign of the inhabitants, even though they suspected they were not far away. They even thought they could smell the smoke from their fires. The locals were evidently avoiding them deliberately. Captain Cook decided not to search for them, but rather to leave it to time and their own free will whether they wanted to establish contact. By the time they returned to the ship, night had already fallen.
Sunday, March 29th, 1773, Dusky Bay, New Zealand.
The entire following morning, heavy rain fell. In the afternoon, however, the weather cleared, allowing them to cross to the other side of the bay and enter the forest. Moving through it was now even more difficult than before. Besides the previously mentioned obstacles, tangled vines and fallen trees, the rain had softened the ground so much that every step became slippery. Nevertheless, their effort was at least rewarded by finding a few plants still in bloom, despite the late season. Additionally, the abundance of unfamiliar trees and shrubs amazed them, revealing the botanical richness of this land. However, without flowers or fruit, a closer botanical examination was impossible. The following 2 days, continuous rain and stormy weather kept them confined to the ship, sapping their morale. If such weather persisted, which was likely given the season, their remaining stay would be unpleasant. In this concern, they took advantage of the first clear afternoon on April 1st to revisit the bay where they had previously seen the indigenous people. Everything remained as they had left it, and it seemed that no one had been near the canoe in the meantime. With the clear weather, they could now overlook the entire bay. It was spacious enough to anchor an entire fleet and had high mountains on its southwest side, covered with trees nearly from summit to shore. The various headlands extending into the sea and the islands within the bay created a striking, picturesque view. As the sun set, its light illuminated the still water's surface. The different shades of green, combined with the songs of birds echoing around the bay on this calm evening, softened the rough, wild contours of the landscape in a strikingly contrasting yet harmonious way. The pleasure of the previous evening enticed them, in the bright morning weather of the following day, to return to the bay at sunrise. They remained there until late in the evening and returned to the ship with a full load of new birds and plants. They had taken along a young dog that some officers had acquired at the Cape of Good Hope, intending to see if he could get accustomed to gunfire and be trained for hunting. However, as soon as the first shot was fired, he bolted into the forest, and despite all calls and attempts to lure him back, refused to return. In their absence, Captain Cook also took advantage of the fine weather to explore various areas of the bay in more detail. During this excursion, he passed a small rock near their first anchorage, which they had already named Seal Rock, as many of these animals regularly spent the night there. That day, he found a large number of them again and managed to shoot 3. One of these seals, after being repeatedly wounded, became furious and attacked the boat, which ultimately cost him his life. He was about 1.8 meters long, and despite being quite thin, still weighed 100 kilograms. From there, the captain passed several small islands and eventually reached the northwestern end of the bay, where the 0.5-finger headland was located. In a beautiful cove, he found a large number of water birds, many of which he shot and brought back on board. After this brief excursion, the return of heavy rain forced them once more to remain on board. The damp weather made an already persistent nuisance even worse: tiny land mosquitoes that had plagued them since their arrival in Dusky Bay. These insects, particularly abundant at the forest's edge, were called sandflies by the sailors. Although they were barely half the size of mosquitoes or midges, their bites were extremely painful. When the affected area became warm, an unbearable itching followed. The slightest rubbing or scratching caused significant swelling and intense pain. Not everyone suffered equally from them. Some barely noticed the bites, while others were tormented terribly. One of the worst affected was Georg's father, who was so badly afflicted that he was unable to hold a pen to record the day's events in his journal. That night, he even developed a severe fever from the wounds. They tried various remedies, but none were effective. The best solution was to apply a soft pomade to the hands and face and to always wear gloves.
Dusky Sound may look like a paradise, but its worst tormentors are tiny and relentless: sandflies. These bloodthirsty insects plagued Cook's crew, and I can confirm from personal experience that not a single word of Forster's account is exaggerated. While filming for my Voyage to Go channel, I attempted to hike to Dusky Bay, only to be mercilessly attacked. The moment I stood still, swarms descended, biting through clothing and ignoring repellents. Any attempt to work calmly was hopeless. No wonder Cook's men quickly realized why the Māori avoided settling here. In Dusky Sound, the true rulers are the sandflies, small but utterly unforgiving. This concludes part 11 of Georg Forster's journey around the world aboard the HMS Resolution under the command of James Cook. I have linked a map of the locations of this episode in the show notes. For those who would like to see the locations of the journey around the world on the present day, I recommend my YouTube channel, Voyage to Go. There, I visit the places from Georg Forster's travel narrative and try to uncover traces and connections between today and the past. So that was episode 11 of our journey around the world with Georg Forster, Captain Cook and the HMS Resolution, on which we will continue our travels together in the coming weeks. I hope we can travel a little further together, because life is a journey, being part of it is everything.